What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue with our 2023 schedule preview and projected record series. The Florida State Seminoles are up next. Before we get to 2023, let's look back at 2022. Here was the schedule from last season for Florida State. It was just that one stretch right there in the middle of the season that got them Wake Forest, at NC State, Clemson. Those three games, the only losses. And you look at the rest of the schedule, LSU, that was a tough game. They were able to win it. Miami was not very good. Florida was not as good as they were maybe expected to be. So it really came down to those three games. They were not able to win any of them, or it could have been a much better season. I'll tell you what, I was surprised, honestly, when Florida State beat LSU, and especially if you look back at the way LSU finished the season. That was a really good win. So give them a lot of credit for that win, and give them a lot of credit for scheduling that game, because when you're a Power 5 team and you already have a non-conference game against a rival like they do against Florida, and then to go out and schedule another SEC team like LSU, give them a lot of credit for that, and they did it again this season as well. Here is the non-conference schedule, or the games that they play in the non-conference course. LSU, they'll play them this time in Orlando. Also, they'll play Southern Miss and North Alabama, so yeah, two pretty easy games there. And then it's on the road at Florida. Got them home last year. This time it'll be on the road. So the same thing that you got last year. Two SEC teams, LSU and Florida. And it almost feels like Florida State is now kind of taking it up a notch. They're a level above Florida. So that's a game that you almost count on this year after what we saw last season. It is on the road, though, so that'll make it tricky, of course. But let's go game by game now and look at this schedule. So they start off with LSU. It'll be on Sunday night again, just like last year. They will play in Orlando. Huge game there. I think some people might have those two teams in their preseason top fives. I think they'll be in pretty much everyone's top tens. So that is just a massive showdown there to start off the season. It'll be the lone game there on Sunday night. So all of the national audience will be watching that game just like last season. So that's a huge game there. Then they play Southern Miss on September the 9th. On the road at Boston College to open up ACC play on the 16th. And then on the road at Clemson on September 23rd. If they do lose this game, though, because it's so early in the year, they can overcome that if they can win out and then maybe win a rematch against Clemson in the ACC Championship. Remember, no divisions this year. But if they can do that, they'll be in a great spot to make the college football playoff. So that's not a must-win necessarily, but you can't lose to LSU and Clemson. I think if you lose both of those games, it's going to be very tough. I wouldn't say they're out of it. If LSU winds up being undefeated, they're the number one team in the country, and Clemson's sitting there at 12-0 when you play them in the ACC Championship. There is still maybe a chance for Florida State, but it'll be tough. And having your two biggest games in the first month of the season, that can be a challenge. They get a bye week after Clemson, and then they'll go into the month of October. They play Virginia Tech on October the 7th, Syracuse at home on October the 14th. Then it's Duke on the 21st. So 3 home games in a row, very winnable games, although watch out for Duke. That could be a tricky matchup there. They'll play Wake Forest on the 28th on the road. So it's kind of weird how this schedule sets up, the conference schedule. They play Boston College and Clemson, back-to-back road games. Then they get 3 home games, and then back-to-back road games again, Wake Forest and Pitt. Those will be challenges there on the road. Again, back-to-back road games are never easy. They get Miami at home on the 11th. Then it's North Alabama, and then it's on the road at Florida. So again, just looking at the ACC schedule, it's pretty favorable. They don't have to play NC State, who I think could be pretty good this year. They don't have to play North Carolina. They don't have to face Drake May in that offense. So you like the matchups here, but maybe not the way it sets up. With back-to-back road games, Clemson on the second half of that after they play Boston College, Wake Forest and Pitt, back-to-back road games there. I don't like that. You start off with an SEC opponent in LSU. You finish with an SEC opponent in Florida. So overall, this schedule, it's pretty tough, but it's not that bad. It's we've seen tougher schedules for sure for Florida State. Yes, it's a very, very challenging non-conference schedule, or respectable. Again, Florida, we don't know how good they're going to be, but it's very respectable with LSU and Florida in the non-conference. But pretty nice opponents in the ACC. It's just the 2 back-to-back road games that I think make it a little bit tricky. But all in all, not too bad of a schedule for Florida State. You can see why some people are probably going to have this team in the college football playoff in 2023. Here were some of the projections from last season. Of course, they were 9-3. Our projection had them at 7-5. I predicted them to go 7-5. FBI had them around 7-5, and the over/under was at 6.5. So 6-6, 7-5. They definitely exceeded expectations last season. Part of that was because they were good. I mean, they were better than I think most people expected them to be, and maybe some of the teams that they played were not quite as good as we expected them to be last season. But it was a really good year for them, 9-3. And now we're going to take a look at the projection for 2023. Again, this is the schedule. This is a scale that we'll be using. If it's a 50-50 game, if it stays in the white, that means it's basically a spread of 3 or 4 points, less than 6. If it's less than 20, over 80%, that means the spread is going to be a 20 or more point spread. 20-29, 71-80, those are games where I think the spread will be 10-19 points. And 30-39, 61-70, those are games where I think the spread will be 6, 7, 8 points, kind of in that range. So let's get started here. We'll start with the easy wins for them, and I think you've got a couple of them. Southern Miss, North Alabama. North Alabama's like 99%. Southern Miss is probably, closer to 95%, but both are way above 80%. Florida State should be favored by 20-plus points in both of these games. Really no doubt about that. And those are your easy wins. Those are your guaranteed wins unless something crazy happens. Then we go to the games in the blue. I think Boston College, Virginia Tech, and Syracuse. I do think Florida State will be double-digit favorites in all 3 of these games. Boston College, because it's on the road, maybe it's around 14. Virginia Tech, based off of how they were last year, that one's pushing that 20-point mark. Probably 18-point favorites in that game. Syracuse, they could be a pretty decent team next year, so that one's probably around 13, 14 points as well. But I think Florida State will be clear, pretty double-digit favorites, again, in all 3 of those games. So when we do our projection, we're going to count all 5 of these games as wins. So these are your 5 wins, not guaranteed the games in the blue, but it would be a very big surprise if Florida State were to lose any of those 3 matchups. Okay, let's go now to the games in the purple. These are games where I think Florida State will be favored by about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points. I think it's all these games at the end of the season. Duke, Wake Forest, Pitt, Miami, and Florida. I do think Florida State will be favored in all 5 of these games, but not by double digits. I think they'll be favored by 7 or 8 against Duke, especially playing at home. Duke, though, could be pretty good this year. Wake Forest, without Sam Hartman, I was close to putting this one in the blue, but because it's on the road, that's why I wound up in the purple here. Put that one at like 9, maybe a 9-point spread. Pittsburgh also probably around 7 or 8, but that one's on the road. They could wind up being pretty good, so that's not going to be an easy win. Miami is a rivalry game. I expect them to be at least somewhat better this year. Florida, rivalry game, and it's on the road. I do think Florida State is in a tier way above Florida going into this year, but rivalry game on the road, you never know. And Miami, kind of the same story there because it's a rivalry game. If it was not, those might be in the blue because, again, I think Florida State's clearly better than both of those teams. But anything can happen in college football, obviously. So that leaves LSU and Clemson. These are your 50-50 games. These are the ones that could go either way. If they take care of business in the rest of their games, the season comes down to LSU and Clemson. So the biggest games for them, obviously, in the month of September. I do think Florida State will be a slight underdog against LSU. That's probably going to be a pick 'em, though. I mean, that one's going to be very close. Clemson, they'll probably be an underdog in that one because it's on the road, but only 3 or 4 points. So, again, that's why I say those games really could go either way. I think the spreads will be very low on them, but I think Florida State will be favored in 10 of the 12 games that they play. But to do the projection, what we do, we count the blue and the green games as wins. Use 65% for these games in the purple, 50% for the games in the white. Average all that out, and that's how we get the projection. So just the formula that I've been doing the last few years here, and this is how it comes out. 9-3, so same record as last year. Just the odds would say that they're gonna split the 50-50 games, LSU and Clemson. And then when you got 5 games where they're not going to be a huge favorite, you could say they're probably going to go 3-2 in those games, and that's how you would wind up at 9-3. I actually think if they go 9-3, they probably lose to LSU and Clemson. I don't think they lose 2 out of these games in the purple. Just my personal prediction out of Duke, Wake Forest, Pitt, Miami, and Florida. Maybe they lose 1 of those games. I don't really see them losing 2. But again, just using this formula, it does give them 3 losses. So the same record as last year. The projected record for Florida State this year in 2023 is 9-3.